Imagine surviving slavery, finally becoming free, and then choosing to buy another person. Oh yes, that happened more than once. And you've probably heard some people say, well, black people own slaves too. And yes, that's true, but the way that story gets told is missing so much. I mean, it completely changes what actually happened. Because this isn't just a random fact that you just throw into an argument. These were real people with real lives making real decisions in a system that was already broken. So instead of repeating a sentence that everyone thinks they understand, let's talk about the people behind it. Once you actually hear their stories, the conversation changes completely. Because now, the question isn't just what happened. The question is, how does one go from being enslaved to being the person enforcing it? If this is your first time seeing me on your screen, hi, my name is Nikita, and on random days of the week, I sit down, do my makeup, and talk about history. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you've clicked on the right video. That was a long ass intro, okay? Anyways, let's get started. Before I get started, I'm just gonna go ahead and pin this so it doesn't get in my way because I do not have time. Ow. Okay, much better. Yes. Okay, so let's start with a man whose story most people have never heard. Anthony Johnson. Do you know him? Do you know Anthony? I didn't know him till I made this video, so yeah. Okay, so Anthony's life begins in a place we can't fully reconstruct. Somewhere in Africa. Listen, I tried to look, but yeah, I don't know. Somewhere in Africa for sure. He was born into a world that had nothing to do with Europe, nothing to do with America, and nothing to do with a system that would later define his life. So I tried looking, but we don't know his name at birth. We don't know what language he spoke, and we don't have any information about his family. And that's not by accident. Because you see, everything that made him him was taken. At some point in his life, Anthony was captured. Ah, yes. Yes, he was. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way like movies try to show, but in the quiet, violent reality of raids and conflict that fed into a growing trade. He was forced onto a ship packed with other human beings, transported across the Atlantic in conditions so brutal that many did not survive the journey. But Anthony Johnson? Oh, he survived. He was strong. Now, when you're hearing all of this about being transported across the Atlantic and being packed in a ship with other human beings, that sounds familiar, right? Ah, yes. Slavery. Yes, yes, yes. Very familiar. Now, if you think about slavery the way we know it now, you might be assuming, well, his fate is sealed. You know, like, yeah, they put him in a ship packed with other human beings, then transported him to the Atlantic. Oh yeah, he's done for. His life is over. Bon voyage, Anthony. Until next time. But no, you would be wrong. Which is crazy because that's the same thing I thought. When I was reading his story, I was like, yeah, they put him on a boat, done for. That's it. But no, because back then, slavery wasn't the way we know it now. At least, not yet. Which means Anthony's story doesn't start the way you think it does. Nope. And when he finally arrived to Virginia, he entered a world that was still trying to figure itself out. This were the early 1600s. Jamestown, one of the first colonies, was struggling. And when I say struggling, I mean, girl, the struggle was real, okay? People were dying more than they were thriving. Whatever was going on in that town was not funny. So with everyone, their mom, their dog, their dad, their grandma dying, you can already imagine that labor, and I mean any labor, was very important. It was valuable. People needed things and there weren't enough people to get them from. People were dying. Let's say you are a, I don't know, smith, or you can build houses, right? And there's 5 people that can build houses in town. And then 3 of them die. Now there's only 2 people that can build houses. So now those 2 people become very valuable because they're the only 2 people that know how to build houses in the whole town. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Okay, great. I'm glad you get it because I was running out of examples. But yeah, basically labor was very important. Any type of labor was important. It was so valuable at that time. And at this point, like I mentioned before, the system wasn't yet the fully developed race-based slavery that we know today. I mean, there were African laborers, there were European indentured servants, and most importantly, there was a very blurred line between temporary servitude and lifelong bondage. And somehow, within all that uncertainty, Anthony Johnson endured. He worked, he survived disease, hunger, instability. Many years passed, and eventually he became a free man. Ah, yes, a free man at last. Now pause right here, okay? Let's pause. Because that alone should have been a turning point, yes? Yeah, we can all agree. I mean, freedom, after everything he had been through, should have meant walking away, stepping away from the system, and never looking back. I mean, at least that's what I would have done. But of course, that's not what happened, because I'm sitting here telling you his story. So, yeah. Our friend Anthony Johnson didn't just walk away and disappear into obscurity. Oh no, he built something. He acquired land. About 250 acres, 250 acres, same thing. Let me tell you, babe, if you don't know anything about land, that's a lot. It's a lot of land. And now, in our time, 250 acres can cost about $500,000 to anywhere between $7.5 billion. So yeah, it's a lot. Now, obviously the price depends on the location of the land, what the land has in it, like how it looks, like it, you know, it can vary. It can vary, but that's still a lot, you know? $500,000 for land? Babe, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money, that's a lot of land. And that's what Anthony had, a lot of land. So our friend Anthony, he began farming tobacco. Have you heard of tobacco? Yes, that's what Anthony was farming in his land. Now, if you know anything about tobacco, or you were paying attention in history class, you would know that tobacco was basically the backbone of the colony's economy. It was very valuable. By this time, Anthony had a wife, a family, and a home. And from the outside, it looked like a success story. Hell, the American dream, if I may say so myself. A man who had been enslaved, rebuilding his life from nothing. Doesn't that sound amazing? But in colonial Virginia, success, especially that type of success, came with a requirement: labor. And labor sometimes meant control over other people. At first, like many landowners, Anthony Johnson relied on indentured servants. Indentured servants were people who worked for a set number of years before gaining their freedom. But then came a man named John Kaser. And this is where everything shifts, okay? Pay attention. John Kaser was another African man who had been working under Anthony. And at some point in his service, John Kaser went up to Anthony and was like, "Hey man, I've been working for you for a couple years, you know, and my time's up. It's time for me to go. I should be a free man." Like tomorrow, yeah, that's my last day because I'm supposed to be a free man. I already worked for you for the amount of years that we agreed. So yeah, I'm leaving. I quit. Now listen, babe, because this is the crazy part, right? Instead of agreeing with him, like instead of agreeing with John and being like, "Oh yeah, man, like thanks for your service. Thank you so much. You can go. You're a free man." Anthony Johnson challenged that. He disagreed. He was like, "Hell no, you're not leaving. What do you mean you're a free man? What do you mean? Free? Says who? What do you mean? I still need you." And John Kaser was like, "Hell no, like I already worked my time. I did my time. I should be free by now. Like I'm leaving." So Anthony took it to court. Anthony Johnson didn't take John Kaser to court to argue for fairness or to argue for his freedom. No, Anthony Johnson took John Kaser to court to argue that John Kaser belonged to him. Not temporarily, not conditionally, but permanently, for life.
Hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
Can you believe that? Can you believe that? Someone taking you to court with the argument that you belong to them for life. That is insane. I'm sorry, that is insane. Coming from someone who used to work for someone else. Like coming from someone who used to be a slave. It's insane. I'm sorry. In 1655, the court made a decision that would echo far beyond that moment. The court sided with Anthony Johnson. Oh my God. Oh, they ruled, the court, they ruled that John Kaser was legally the property of Anthony Johnson for life. I'm sorry, this is so insane. Like, this is so crazy. So crazy and brazy. This wasn't just a personal victory for Anthony Johnson. Oh no. this was not about him anymore. At this point, this was a legal shift. Okay? This was one of the earliest cases in colonial America where lifelong servitude was clearly recognized by a court. And that, my friend, was just a small step towards the direction of what would soon become slavery as we know it now. So now, you and I are left with a question that doesn't have an easy answer. Why? Why? Why the hell would he do that? Why would Anthony do that? Why? What the hell? Why would someone who lived through captivity fight to keep someone else in it? Why would someone who used to be a servant keep someone as his lifelong slave? What is going on? You would think he would understand wanting to be free, right? I don't know, babe. I don't know. Let's keep going. Well, as always, when it comes to history, the answer isn't that simple. Because of course, we want the answer to be moral. We want it to make sense emotionally, right? But in reality, it's not. Everything back then was purely strategic. I mean, let's be honest for a second, okay? Colonial Virginia was not somewhere you survived by being idealistic and having morals, okay? People were dying left and right and left, okay? Don't nobody got time for morals? Them people didn't have time to have no damn morals, okay? You got morals, you gonna die tomorrow. Don't take me too seriously. Enough of games. Colonial Virginia was a place where you survived by securing your position. Land meant power, and labor meant wealth. And the line between freedom and vulnerability was dangerously thin. Now, before you go crazy, it's important to understand that Anthony Johnson did not create the system, okay? He did not create slavery. Let's calm down. But he learned how to move within it. And instead of rejecting it, he used it. Now, that forces you and I to confront something that might be a bit uncomfortable. Oppression doesn't automatically create solidarity, okay? Sometimes it creates people who are willing to do whatever it takes to never be powerless ever again. And Anthony Johnson? Well, he might just be an example of that. But if you think this story was complicated, the next one doesn't even leave room for interpretation. If Anthony Johnson's story felt complicated, William Ellison's story might feel intentional. Because by the time William Ellison was born, somewhere around 1790, in South Carolina, there was no confusion about what slavery was. This wasn't a blurred system anymore. This was racial. This was permanent. This was generational. If you were born into it, you stayed in it. And that's exactly how William Ellison's life began. He was born enslaved, not captured, not transitioned into it, born into it. Which means from the very first moment of his life, his future was already decided for him. Or at least, that's how it was supposed to be. But our friend Ellison here had something that made him different. He had a skill. He was trained to work with cotton gins, which were machines that separated cotton fibers from seeds. Now, that skill might not seem like a lot to you, but back in the day, this skill was very valuable, extremely valuable. Cotton wasn't just a crop. It was money. It was power. It was the foundation of the Southern economy. And our friend Ellison knew how to work the machines that made it all possible, which in change made him very useful. And being useful gave him leverage. Ah, yes. Leverage is good because eventually he was able to buy his freedom. And just like that, his life split into two parts: before freedom and after freedom. Now, normally, you would expect the story to go one way from here, you know? You escape slavery, you find freedom, and you just live your life happily ever after away from that whole system. Again, that's what I would do. But William Ellison didn't do that, of course, because we're here talking about him. Instead of escaping from it and running far, far away, he stepped deeper into it. He started a business repairing and operating cotton gins, and he made money. Lots of it. He gained connections, he built a name for himself, and then he started buying enslaved people. Not one, not two, dozens. Men, women, children. By the time William Ellison died, he was one of the largest slave owners in his region. A black man owning other black people. I think I put too much concealer and now I look like something that crawled out of earth and probably should have stayed in there. Let's try to fix it. Anyways, yes, where were we? A black man owning other black people inside the exact same system that had once defined his life. Very controversial. And this time, there's no ambiguity. This wasn't early colonial Virginia. This wasn't a legal gray area. This was plantation slavery, the kind we all think of. The kind built on greed, control, violence, and profit. So now, the question changes. With Anthony, we asked, why did this happen? How did this happen? With William Ellison, we have to ask something else. And the question is, why would someone who knew exactly how brutal this system was choose to then benefit from it? The answer, in my opinion, power. Yes, power. Because in the South, power had a very specific look. It looked like land, it looked like wealth, and it looked like how many people you could control. And William Ellison wanted that power. He sent his children to be educated and he secured his family's position. He built a legacy. But the problem is that legacy was built on the same foundation that oppressed him, which forces another uncomfortable truth. Escaping a system doesn't always mean rejecting it. Sometimes it means mastering it. And William Ellison didn't just survive slavery, he learned how it worked and then used it. By the time the Civil War started, William Ellison wasn't just living in the system, he was now fighting to protect it. Ah, yes. Yes, he was. Records show that William and his family were on the Confederate side of the war and supported them. They supported the Confederacy by donating money and buying bonds. Now, by the time the war started in 1861, William Ellison himself was too old to fight. But on the other hand, his sons, Henry Reuben and William Jr., tried to enlist to help the war, but they were refused because of their race. If things weren't already uncomfortable, this is the part where they get a little bit more uncomfortable. But it's important that we learn these things. By the time the Civil War started, William Ellison was wealthy, a major slaveholder, and deeply invested in the plantation economy. The Confederacy existed to protect slavery as an institution. So for William Ellison, supporting the Confederacy meant protecting his wealth, his status, and his entire way of life. So now we've seen two men, both shaped by slavery and both becoming part of it in completely different ways. But the next story adds another layer to this, because what happens when you're never enslaved at all, but yet you still end up owning enslaved people? Right now I'm playing around with like these shades and like this darker shade like right in my inner corner, and I'm thinking, since I'm wearing green, like a little green, I don't know if you can see it but I think I want to add some green in there. That's what we're gonna do. Anyways, back to the story, right? So Andrew Durnford, have you heard of him? No? Great, me neither. So by the time Andrew Durnford enters the story, we are no longer in the early chaos of Virginia, and we're not in the rigid binary world of the Deep South anymore. We're in Louisiana. Yes, we're in Louisiana. Louisiana. Oh my God. Louisiana, yes. We're in Louisiana. And in Louisiana, they played by different rules. Now, what exactly do we know about Andrew Durnford? He was born in the early 1700s, possibly in the Caribbean, to a white father and a black mother, which placed him in a very specific category. He was not enslaved, but he wasn't an equal either. He was part of a group known as Free People of Color, and in Louisiana, that group existed in a very strange in-between space. They could own property, they could be educated, some even became wealthy, but they lived in a system that constantly reminded them where they stood, not at the bottom, and definitely not at the top. So our friend Andrew grew up with access to education, access to connections, and access to so many opportunities. And when he moved to Louisiana, he stepped into a society where wealth wasn't just admired, it was power. And one of the fastest ways to gain that power? Land. Ah yes, land. So Durnford acquired it. Yes, he got land. Not just any land, but land used for sugar plantation. Now, if you know anything about sugar plantation, you would know that sugar plantations were some of the most brutal places to be in the Americas. The labor was relentless, the conditions were very harsh, and the mortality rates were high. Producing sugar required intense non-stop work, and that kind of work required a labor force that wasn't free to leave. Which brings us to the turning point. To run his plantation, Andrew needed enslaved people. Ah yes, dozens of them. Men and women whose labor sustained his wealth, whose lives were controlled by the same system that structured the entire society around him. And here's what makes the story different. I don't know if I mentioned this. Andrew Durnford was never enslaved. He didn't have to rise out of that experience. He started close enough to the middle, close enough to power to access it, but still far enough to not understand its limits. So now the question we're asking is, why would someone in that position participate in slavery? Well, let me tell you, my friend. Because access changes perspective. When you're given the opportunity to move on within a system, even if it's a flawed one, the pressure to take it can be very overwhelming, especially when that system is designed so that security, stability, and wealth depend on it. For Durnford, owning land and enslaved people wasn't just about profit. It was about securing a position in a world that was constantly deciding who mattered and who didn't. And instead of rejecting that system, he moved within it successfully. Which forces you and I to look at this from a different angle. Because not every story here is about survival. Some are about proximity to power and what people choose to do when they finally get close to it. Now, we don't have any records telling us whether Andrew Durnford was cruel to his slaves, but we also don't have any telling us he wasn't. And that goes for the other two men as well, Anthony Johnson and William Ellison. We have no idea if they treated their slaves well or not. Then again, the system they were part of didn't leave much room for kindness. So now we've seen three paths. One man who was enslaved and became free, one who rose through the system and fully embraced it, and one who started with access and used it to build power. But the last story might be the most complex of all, because it forces us to sit with a question that doesn't have a clean answer. Let's talk about it. Now, we've reached our last character, Marie Thérèse Metoyer, often called Coin. She was born into slavery in 1742 in Louisiana. And her story doesn't start with opportunity. It starts with limitation, control, with a life that from the very beginning wasn't hers to decide. She grew up in a system where everything, her body, her labor, her future, all belonged to someone else. And like many enslaved women at the time, her life was not just shaped by labor, but also by vulnerability. Over time, we're gonna call her Coin, okay? Cool. Over time, Coin formed a relationship with a French colonist, Claude Thomas Pierre Metoyer, and eventually, she gained her freedom. Now that moment, freedom should feel like the end of the struggle, but it wasn't. For Coin, that freedom was just the beginning of a different kind of fight. Because unfortunately, being free in Louisiana didn't mean being safe. It didn't mean being equal either. It meant navigating a system that could shift against you at any moment. So, she did something remarkable. She built, she farmed, and she acquired land. Coin created stability in a world where stability was rare for someone in her position. And over time, she became one of the founders of a powerful Creole community along the Cane River. She built a legacy, a name, and a future for her children. But here's where the story becomes difficult. You see, Coin owned enslaved people. And unlike all the other stories that we've talked about today, this one didn't seat neatly in one category. And that's because some of the people that she purchased were believed to have been family members, people she might have been trying to protect from being sold, separated, or lost completely. Which sounds great, right? But at the same time, she also had other enslaved people working her land, and their hard work contributed to her success. Those enslaved people were also part of of the same system she had been trapped in. So what exactly do we do with that? Because it doesn't fit the narrative. Her story isn't purely about survival or power. It's somewhere in between, a mix of protection, strategy, and participation. Coin's story forces us to confront a reality that might not be easy to sit with. And the reality is that sometimes, within a broken system, people make choices that are both understandable and also complicated to understand. She didn't create the system and she didn't make the rules either, but she learned how to live within it. And in doing so, she both resisted and also became part of it. So now we've seen 4 different lives and 4 different paths. 4 people who ended up in the same place from completely different directions. First, with Anthony Johnson, who survived slavery and then went on to make someone else his slave. And then with William Ellison, who escaped it and then went on to become the largest slaveholder in his region. Andrew Durnford, who was never enslaved but went on to build his life on the system. And lastly, Marie Thérèse, who navigated it in a way that still leaves question. So yes, Black people did own slaves. That part is true. But when you actually look at the stories, the context, the time period, the reasons, you realize that sentence alone doesn't explain anything. All it does is simplify something that was never simple. Because this wasn't just one story. It wasn't one experience. And it definitely wasn't one type of decision. And if history teaches us anything, it's that people don't always fit into clean categories. Sometimes they survive systems, and other times they benefit from them. And sometimes they do both. So the next time you hear that sentence, Black people owned slaves too, just know that's not the full story. It never was. If you like history that actually makes you think, why don't you stay here? Stick around, because there's a lot more that we need to talk about. With that being said, I do hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope we were both able to learn something. I wish you a happy rest of your day. Please stay safe, and I will see you next week. Bye!